and welcome to the Higher Learning Exchange podcast, a space for innovators to push the boundaries of education practice and technology. I am Carmen Tomas, your host today, and I am thrilled to welcome Yaz El-Hakim.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Lovely to be here.
Okay, so Yaz El-Hakim is a former academic and then turned co-founder of the startup Verify It. Yaz, in your own words, please tell us about this great work you're doing with Verify It.
Thank you very much. Abby Waterer, my co-founder, and I co-founded Verify Ed in 2019. And we did so on the back of our backgrounds, myself in academia, Abby's in startups, predominantly in technology startups. And we saw this developing technology in blockchain, which allowed things to be immutable, that they were tamper-proof, that things couldn't be changed once they'd been recorded. And I thought, actually, back to my educational time at Winchester University in the UK, there was a moment where we'd graduate students at the end of their degrees and they would be given a piece of paper. And I just thought at that moment, wouldn't it be amazing to do digital, blockchain-backed digital degrees that effectively we've spent thousands of pounds on them, but then the piece of paper is then reproduced in different parts of the world for a few pounds. And you think, actually, shouldn't the reputation of the institutions and the piece of paper actually be more valued and keep its value in the markets? And I started thinking, and we just pondered whether we could do something. And we just started speaking with people. So I've obviously got a network of academics and other people that I'd spoke to a couple of vice chancellors and people who are in the space thinking about how they might do things differently in the future. And we just thought there seems to be an opportunity and demand. And the Law Society of Ireland was our very first client who chose to do a project with us to see if they could do their digital credentials in this way. And it was a very simple thing. We'll remove educational fraud. And after about 18 months, and this is me speaking very openly, but after 18 months, we were speaking with more and more universities and course providers, learning providers. And we started to realize the secret and the value in what we were doing wasn't so much in the immutability of the certificate. Yes, that was a great foundation. But in actual fact, it was the ability for us to surface granular data that wasn't ordinarily surfaced. So the ability to take someone's learning pathway through their degree, or in addition to their degree, the extracurricular things that they were doing, or even just doing a small CPD course, instead of having a certificate saying, I did 2 hours of CPD, you could now have a certificate that said, I've done 2 hours of CPD focusing on these pieces of knowledge, this area of application, this skill in applying it, for instance. And then you're able to build a skills and competencies profile that hasn't really existed until now. It's been what we've actually said about ourselves as skills on CVs, covering letters, and then interviews. But it's never been something that's been documented and verified by the awarding body. And now we found ourselves in a position where we were able to work with the awarding bodies to issue that granular data in a verified way. And that has been, I think, the moment where we've seen a lot more interest in the platform and what it can afford, both for the learners, for recruiters and employers in the future, but also for the awarding institution to be able to centrally manage all their issuances, but be able to see the skills that they're graduating students with or having people develop from. And that's been the journey, I think, in the last few years to get to this point where a verified skills profile or verified competency profile is now of significant demand, and lots of people are now talking about it in this way. And it's really phenomenal to have started building then and to be able to catch the wave. Nice surfing analogy from the person who grew up in Cornwall, but the ability for us to catch this wave of for the future of learning and work, where people are able to identify these are the skills and competencies that I have and that would help your organization and add value in this way.
Can you just give me, for example, a case that you're extremely excited about,
Yeah,
an example of one of the best, most proud cases?
of course, of course. So, from our perspective, there's a number of motivations that different universities can have to partner with us to issue digital credentials that are blockchain backed and that surface the skills of their learners. We currently have over 140 organizations signed up to issue digital credentials on our platform in that way. And the case that I'm most proud of, I think, or the one that I've been most uh, touched by that in terms of what it's trying to achieve is, I think, University of Middlesex in the way that they've wanted to do things from two perspectives at the same time. So we've been working with Alan Stewart, the Director of Employability at Middlesex, and been very much focused on the graduate outcomes of their students. I know it's a significant point of focus for many UK universities and universities internationally. But there were two angles from which they wanted to do it. One, being able to issue digital credentials centrally, being able to have that insight as to what's being issued, but not only for the curricular, but also the co-curricular, the extracurricular opportunities that students have. So being able to represent the holistic student journey through the credentials that they're issuing in a way that's useful and easy for their learners to be able to then share a collection of those credentials with a potential employer or a future recruiter. I think for me it really opened my eyes to the potential that our platform could have beyond simply issuing digital credentials that couldn't be faked and that surface these skills. They were saying, actually, we think this could genuinely help the employability of our students. And it was not only the ability to share that collection of verified credentials and skills embedded within them, but it was the students being able to see that development. I think for many people in universities, they're aware of that graduation event happening at the end of the 3, 4, 5 years, depending on how long people have been studying for the specific program they're on. But it's when you're basically getting all of your achievements at the end. So you do see that you've passed modules as you go through and the grades that you've got for them, but you don't actually see the skills develop as you go through that program. And I think the vision at Middlesex for saying we want to be able to scaffold that learning journey and be able to have the students see that development in their skills and competencies as they're going through the journey is a phenomenal vision, and one that I think will be emulated by many once there is acceptance that actually the ability to map those skills and achievements and competencies in a way that is useful both for the learner and for the employer is recognized. I think there's been a lot of resistance to date around this perception that we're distilling something around a holistic education down into some skills. I think seems superficial and doesn't seem like it really goes very deep. But for the learner, actually their ability to see their profile grow and some of their competencies and skills and assessments that they're starting to get better at being able to be demonstrated at higher levels of mastery. It's
Yes.
really powerful, really powerful.
Am I understanding that they are not only getting this picture at the end, but it's also throughout the learner journey? And then when they come to issue the certificate and with these breakdown of the profile and so on, they've already used this throughout. So is that, and how did they do that?
Exactly. So, I mean, every learning journey has a pathway. And so, in degree terms, there's a series of modules typically that are studied across the 3 years, and that those modules carry credit, and that credit amasses to a degree at the end of it where they can get their qualification. What Middlesex is trying to do differently is to say that those modules are part of the pathway, the learning pathway of the curriculum, but there are extracurricular opportunities that students are able to take on that also develop and demonstrate skill development, acquisition, mastery, and those being recognized alongside, so that they would actually see both the credit bearing credentials being added to their profile, the extracurricular credentials being added to their profile, but the skills and the competencies from both being aggregated and amassed on the profile of the learner. And again, this gives the learner the capability as they go through their degree and not just at the end
Yeah.
to look at a summer internship or to look at a placement or to look at some part-time work and actually use their profile before they've graduated to say, in my first and second year, I've developed skills in and the mastery of this, so that it will be of use to your company if I were to do this internship. And so, from my perspective, the ability for that transparency and that development to be seen by the learner as they go through the journey is phenomenally powerful, and I think a very powerful vision for the
Yeah.
future.
So, how is your role playing a role in that learner journey before the graduation and before? Because that bit I'm not sure I've heard before about actually.
Okay. So, we work with, there are three programs in particular that we're looking to work with to demonstrate all of these credentials for those learners. And what we have to do when we onboard the institution is actually look to map the skills with a combination of our AI tool and also of the input from the lecturers and program leaders to be able to identify and amass the data within the credentials that will be issued, so that when the credentials are issued, it automatically starts to build the competency profile of that learner. So they're issued the credentials at the points that they complete those credentials requirements, but within the credentials are the embedded metadata and skills competencies that they want to be recorded against the profile.
Okay.
And so it's all done as they go through their profile, their pathway.
Okay. So pre-graduation, so there's a role for your tool to play as a sort of almost like what you might have talked about in the past, which is the portfolio type of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think there's similarities there to a portfolio where you're aware. And I think the benefit of a portfolio is that reflection that happens in it. So typically, a portfolio, you do a piece of work, you add it to your portfolio, and you reflect on it often. My days at Cedar were often focused on the reflection of that being important. So reflective practice is central, I think, to the development of most educational developers in that community. And I think that was something we also purported as being important for learners as well. So a portfolio is something that you add your assessments to, you add your pieces of work to. And so again, it's back to self-assertions of what you've achieved, as opposed to Verify Ed platform, which is institutionally issued, institutionally recognized.
okay.
And I think that that is deemed more powerful and more trusted by employers than necessarily complete self-assertions. And I think that's the issue with LinkedIn, for instance, is you can put anything you like on LinkedIn, and therefore it's full of self-assertions, whereas actually verified educational achievements in Verify Ed allow learners to say, this is what my institution have issued to me.
Okay. Okay. Understood. But,
Yeah.
yeah, I hadn't heard this part about verify it, but I think it's extremely exciting. I think another thing that drives you, and I've understood this from looking at the tool and some other conversations. I know you're very interested in lifelong learning, and
Yeah.
I'd like to hear about your vision, how verify it, because I know this is one of the drivers behind, this concept and your tool. So I'd like to understand a little bit about where you think you could be in 5 years, and the role that this could play for lifelong learning.
Thank you. I mean, it's a great question, and I could talk for some time on it, I think, but I'll try and concisely state where I think the future lies in lifelong learning. When I was at Winchester, I was director of learning and teaching, and I noticed at graduation days we would graduate the students, and this is going back over a decade, so it's not, or almost a decade, so it's not that this is what current practice is now. But at that time, it struck me that we would graduate our students, and then we would switch off email, switch off library access, switch off almost all their connections to the university, and say, congratulations, you've actually graduated from this university, and we wish you all the best in your career, and we will be in touch every so often to see how you're doing in your career. And it just felt like a wasted potential. That's how I kind of felt we were treating a cohort of students who were massively loyal to the institution at that time, were very excited, were really keen to share with their friends and their family the experience they've had. And if I'm honest, there were many that looked for other ways that they could stay in touch, whether that was in further study or whether there was ways that they tried to create relationships with their department so that they continued a contact point beyond their degree and beyond their graduation. And it just struck me that MOOCs were just starting to become, popularized, and people were starting to talk about MOOCs and the ability for, small bite-sized learning to be available for students. And I just saw the two trends happening at once. So the growth in online learning, the growth in the opportunities from MOOCs that were being provided, and students going into a career that they probably wouldn't stay in for their whole career. The data was already there that they were going to do 3 to 4 different careers in their lifetime. And I think that's got even higher now, that people are going to switch into multiple careers through their working lives. And I just believed that at point of need, when I'd experienced it in my own career, that I'd been promoted for a role. I had, some of the skills, but not all of them. I had to develop some of the additional skills that I needed for that role. And so I always was developing and training and doing more courses and doing more self-development work, whether that was from, coaching providers or from Advanced HE at that time, the HEA, and just trying to get as much development as I could at the point that I needed it. And I saw that as a future that many people would do, where they would be given a problem or a task or a job to do. They wouldn't have all the knowledge necessarily to do it, but they would be able to find, develop, and train themselves on the knowledge needed to execute successfully. And the power of lifelong learning made me think it was a far bigger opportunity to transform people's lives through education than just the higher education experience through that limited 3-year period. And actually, we should be thinking about, and I think people have written about this now, the idea of university as a subscription, or the ability for us to stay related to our institution throughout our lifetimes, to be able to increase our knowledge. And actually, if the knowledge that we need at the point that we're experiencing the problem or that need for that learning is not in our current institution, being able to have other institutions that we can dip into where they have those expertise it was an absolute I don't want to say a no-brainer, but it seemed like such a logical evolution to me in the educational landscape, that learning that's already delivered in modules could become less prerequisite learning and more learning that people could just dip into and develop from that knowledge more quickly. And we've started to see learning providers diversify. So we've seen Google and other big providers come into the space around micro credentials and smaller learning segments. And that, I think, will continue as well as a trend. But the ability for an individual to learn whatever they need at the time that they need it was the future that I saw. And that's why I'm so proud to be building into that space where the credentials that can be achieved from those learnings can be aggregated from multiple providers in one location, for that learners be able to have their lifelong learning ledger and their record of achievement as they go forward. But yeah, the power of education to change people's lives is, one of the main reasons that I've been in education for so long, and a company that I was to co-found would want to be building into that space too. And I feel like this is a really interesting intersection between educational provider, learner, and recruiter employer, all wanting to get the benefit of really rich data
Yeah.
that supports that can match talent with opportunity, and hopefully in a much more global workforce will allow things to level the playing field.
But your vision is much more of a connected journey that moves you from year one all the way
through.
to your career. Okay, so what so how far are we into this vision, and how far you see this how long it's going to take? But also, what are the big barriers to this actually happening in that sort of fully formed version that you've got in your mind?
So I think there are a number of things to consider here in answering that question. One is I think universities have developed significantly from when I left, which was 2014-15. And I think there are much more instances of universities that have career support for life, that have micro credentials that they make available. One of our clients, University College London, have a number of online courses and face-to-face short courses that they're credentialing as well. But the idea that those credentials are then being made available to alumni and actually being made more aware for alumni to be able to see those opportunities to develop and dip back in as and when they need is becoming much more common practice.
Okay.
But I think ultimately the transformation that will be accelerated by the technology, AI for one, it's not. It's been spoken about a lot, and I don't think it's perfect, but I do think that it accelerates an awful lot of activities and processes that would ordinarily have taken quite a lot of time. And I think we'll see things advance rather quickly, both through AI, quantum computing, the leveraging of blockchain for immutability and for provenance. I think those aspects allow us to see a future that may accelerate towards us rather than us taking long, lengthy steps towards them. I think we might find ourselves accelerating quicker and quicker towards the future that we potentially see. For instance, we've got the capability for AI to scan a document and to more quickly and more effectively surface potential skills that are developed through the document. So whether that's a job description or a CV or some other document, and we're able to make sense of and gain insights from a simple document in a way that we couldn't have done 5 years ago with the same technology. Blockchain, although effectively popularized by Satoshi Nakamoto's paper, the white paper about Bitcoin. Actually, that was 2009. And so it's been around a long time, but the scalability of it, the ability for it to be leveraged in our system and in our platform, it only became scalable really at the right level in the last 3 to 4 years. And so we're starting to see this evolution of the technology that once just envisioned is now being able to be utilized and mainstreamed. So I think that the vision I would have said would have been, a decade away for us to get to this point where the skills are meaningful, where people trust the skills that are being purported as having been achieved. I would have said, a decade, years away. But I think with the way that technology is advancing and how quickly we can leverage it to actually make sense of the vast swathes of data, both in the job market and in the learning content and pathways that we've seen advertised, I think we can get there much quicker. I would like to say that there will be a very sophisticated connection of learners and employers within the next 5 years, I would say, at scale.
You say, if you could tell universities start to think about this, little things that that could change, significantly the readiness.
I think I'd like to address that in two ways. One is that I'd say empathizing with the learner experience is one of the most powerful things that anyone who's trying to improve the learning experience can do. So at Winchester and at other universities, I've seen Tester implemented on a number of programs and across institutional processes to try and move from modular assessment to programmatic assessment and becoming aware of the student's experience of bunched up assessments, of over assessment in certain formats, and in the way that feedback is actually given and generated. And until we did Tester, we didn't have that experience of the student very powerfully articulated. And as soon as we had that and we were able to reflect that back to program teams wanted to make the changes. They thought actually the changes were logical and they wanted to do that. It came from them empathizing with the student experience of a lot of modular assessment that wasn't necessarily aligning in a way that created a shared standard and a shared linear pathway to develop mastery in those assessment methods. With Verify Ed, for instance, and actually a lot of my work at Winchester before I left was around student engagement. We got really great empathetic narratives, research, collected data that transformed things. First year law students saying we spoke to first year law students who didn't know what a moot was, a fake or a mock courtroom that they go through the process. They're able to enact immediate change by saying we'll give them a formative experience of a moot court by getting them to come and observe third year moots when they're doing the assessment, or getting a recording of the third year moot and just showing them that, so they've got something that they can look at for standard, for expectation, for awareness. And it increased their grades in the moots in year one by 10% year on year. And you just think, actually, there are changes we can make all over the place that could be powerful for the student learning experience if the student learning experience is being empathized with and we want to really understand it. I think lots of that happened through the pandemic, where people became very aware of the students' experiences, as hard as they were. With Verify Ed, I think until you've spoken to students who've seen a learning ledger grow with their skills profile growing through that period of time, it's difficult to get that understanding of the power that actually just mapping the skills that are being developed, in addition to the curriculum that's being covered and the criticality and the element of it that some people may not want to actually put into tags or into some form of recognition. The students, I think, really value that. I think they understand things and are able to articulate the skills and things that they've developed better with that awareness. And as a sports psychologist, awareness was always the first thing that we wanted to try and address. And how you create that awareness in others is often by holding the mirror up and being able to give them a clear reflection of what they've achieved and what they haven't necessarily. Same is true of coaching and sports coaching, in where I've spent quite a bit of time basketball coaching.
You need a basis for that.
You need a basis for it.
Exactly. And what is the basis? Where is it? A lot of people in my experience would say, but we've got the learning outcomes somewhere. I mean, is that enough? Because that's a pretty standard response sometimes when you're trying to have this conversation. What would be your reaction if I just said, look, but there's already a statement of learning outcomes somewhere? Isn't that what you're talking about here?
I think the learning outcomes are powerful, clear articulations of what is to be achieved. If you ask an employer about how the learning outcomes are received, you get a very different experience. Yeah. It doesn't actually mean something tangible to an employer because they're working in a different world in terms of how we describe capability. Yeah. And so I think the translation between academic institutions and their learning outcomes into terminology that is meaningful to employers is a really important step. And it can be done through our platform, but it can be done different ways as well. It doesn't have to be done this way. But I think that is an important thing to consider. And also, how much the students understand that. I think Chris Russ did something brilliant at Oxford Brookes and got students to actually internalize both the assessment criteria and the learning outcomes from the modules and from the assessments. And I think that simple activity was him saying, we've used terminology. We want to make sure that you understand that terminology. So we're going to do an activity that sees you do that. And I think there's a lot of assumptions in higher education that because something is done correctly and as the external examiners expect it and as all of the standards that we adhere to, from the FHEQ across to other expectations in the sector, those standards are meaningful to a lot of academics and people in academia, but may not be as meaningful or as easily understood to students and to employers. And I think that's a key reflection that I've had through my career to date, seeing both sides of the fence.
Okay, so definitely when coming to implement tools like your tool and maybe others as well that can enable these other potentials to open up, um, you're taking us back to, students, their experience, their narratives, their own awareness, and making that more transparent. And I think that's an amazing, sort of insight, to be frank. Are there any other thoughts? Because I think that's going to make people think, and they'll need to think quite deeply. Can you share other, other points that you think would help institutions, start to sort of get ready, for this longer journey?
Absolutely. I mean, one of our key things that we focus on are the current lack of data that is being recorded. So the granular data that we know exists through the learning experience is not currently recorded anywhere. So I think for institutions to take three very simple steps forward would be to reflect and map the skill data that they believe is happening across their learning experiences, not in a way to water down or distill complex learning into meaningless tags, as I've heard it described, but actually just to afford additional insights for students, learners, employers as to what's being worked on within those modules.
Hmm.
So mapping the skill data or the competency data more effectively and being more aware of it as an institution and as a program.
Hmm.
Being able to recognize additional learning. So I know that there was a lot of press, there's always been a lot of press talking about value for money of degrees, particularly face to face on campus. And I think that that's not recognizing a true richness of the experience. Yet the Higher Education Achievement Report, I think, has largely failed at being able to offer that holistic learning experience of the students. And although brilliantly intentioned, and I was there at its inception, um, with the late Sir Bob Burgess, I think that there would be a better way of reflecting those extracurricular and additional achievements in the credential format that we have, which is simpler to observe for the learner, but more easily shared with employers, where it can be validated and recognized by an institution rather than just self-asserted on a CV. I think it draws more weight that way. And I think the ability for an institution to allow the verification of credentials in a decentralized way, currently having to use HEAD or other providers to verify a degree at cost, just adds friction to the recruitment process and to the recruitment. I mean, any employer or recruiter that's looking to draw in talent sometimes hit that friction of being able to verify an educational credential, particularly internationally and across
Yeah.
borders, which we know is a significant friction and significant pain point that we're looking into and working with governments and others to consider how it could be best addressed. But just institution to institution as well, like for an employer to go, have you got this degree from there? That shouldn't take up to a month and cost £15. That should be done instantly in a decentralized, immutable way where you can be guaranteed that what you're seeing is what was issued by that institution's blockchain wallet. That removes any need for verification at cost
Hmm.
and means that we can start focusing on the data within it to make sure that we create a better fit
Hmm.
between institutions and employers. Ultimately, I think reading around the area around micro credentials, recognition, the developing number of case studies that are where people are being able to show increasing in online footprint. People are able to share things that are immutable more freely. So we don't see, degree providers saying, please don't share your hard copy degree online, because people internationally can then mimic it much more effectively and create frauds that are more believable. You can actually share it with pride. You can use that sharing to create more online traffic back to your learning opportunities through those social networks and professional networks. You can actually leverage many benefits in terms of time and cost savings from posting pieces of card around the world, reducing carbon, using a blockchain credentialing platform like ours that actually uses a carbon neutral underlying technology. There are a number of ways that I think universities could reflect on what they're doing in terms of the data and the issuing of those credentials and which credentials they're recognizing or which achievements they're recognizing and how, and the technology they use to create multiple benefits for their institution, but also for the learners and recruiters that are then going to be stakeholders who leverage that data in the future.